Good morning. So I'll try to drive you in the next 15 minutes in somewhere in the future of work, but getting maybe a different angles of the different speakers we heard so far. So basically, if you look at what's currently happening in the world, and there is nothing new for you, we have a few mega trends which are driving us. And again, for most of you, it's nothing new. We go to rapid urbanization. We currently have 1.5 billion people which are added every week in the cities, and half of the world population is living in cities. We obviously are going to climate change. No news for you. I was in Russia last week, and they had their first snow of the year, whereas usually it's -20. I was in Leningrad a few weeks earlier. The river should be frozen, and of course it's fully liquid. And I think we had got some record high temperature in Finland this year, which they never experienced. So, of course, there is no climate change, but there is something we can still explain left and right. That will also clearly see that with the population rising, we're going to need more food, more water, more energy, and obviously that will have a consequence on labor. Also, we have a shift in the economic power, with half the population living in Africa, as you know, with living less than $1.2. And one might think, well, those guys are making a lot of babies, so the solution comes there. I was a few months ago in Angola. I can tell you that half of the population is less than 20 years old, but only 50% access major medication. And when you find people, you have to disregard half of them because of severe diseases. So basically recruiting in this kind of country, whereas you have a lot of young people available, first, they are not educated, and even when they are, you can't hire them because they have severe diseases. So that's not an easy picture. Demography is also something which is not helping us. This is another big one which is hitting us. And by definition, we are aging. This is nothing new to you. But in 30 years, we're going to have 2 people in working age for 1 elderly person. So basically, we are getting in severe discussions, and I'm going to come back on this one. And finally, and this is, I know, the theme of this morning, there are some technological breakthrough, and we are here in machine learning, so I'm talking about data. Only in the 10 years, we have 44 times more data available, and that has, of course, consequences. Let's go now in some of the opportunities. These are the maturing technology of the 21st century, and again, you recognize those 8 technologies, and all those acronyms are familiar to you. By the way, they are familiar to you, but in a normal crowd, most of them would not be familiar to most of the people, which is already one of the problems we're going to see in a minute. And basically, those 8 technologies, they will be impacted 10 to 15% of the job in the next 5 years for all the sectors you see there. Can you imagine how many tens of millions of people it represents? And how many jobs will be disrupted in the next years to come? Not a few, many, quite many. But of course, on the positive side, you could say, okay, we're going to add 40% of GDP. This is absolutely positive. It is 15 billion that only AI is expecting to have as an economic impact in 2030. It is absolutely fantastic. And you can see here all the technologies AI is kind of influencing. So this is all going positive. Okay, let's maybe shift to something you might like. And I invite you to look on the left side, these little graphs which are evolving. Actually, these are those country pyramid age which are currently evolving in front of you from now to 2040. And you can clearly see that the nice triangle shape some of them had is evolving to the opposite direction, which means basically that we have more and more old people and less young people to take position in companies. The good news is if we are going to Switzerland, which is the right graph, you see that most of the jobs you've been creating are high-skilled jobs, which is a good news because basically these are the ones which are going to be less targeted by technology in the coming years. I don't know for the for maybe in 10 years' time, but in the near future, that's going to be the one who's going to be the least impacted. But again, I will come back with other stats on that in a second. So we see there are some severe things currently happening in the world. And by the way, all OECD countries by 2030 will be in lack of people, but one being India, which will be the only net exporter of resources. So that's an interesting information. And maybe for your information, again, a country like Japan, and I know maybe David talked about it in the morning, is losing 400,000 workers every year. 400,000 workers every year are moving out and are not replaced. It says something about what the difficulty to hire could be in such a country where we have 0.5 applicant by open job. Hey, HR, good luck. So what's the situation in Switzerland? Because there is another phenomenon which is also coming there, which is immigration. So I like to just picture, because there are a lot of phantasm running about immigration. And if you look at this graph, and I will explain you, this is the increase of population depending of the number of people you have. The blue are the nationals, the green are the immigrants which are working, and the brown are the ones which are not working in the Swiss population. So you see that if you don't have people coming into Switzerland, you are really getting in severe problem. By the way, in Luxembourg it's even worse, and in many countries it's of course something which is quite in demand. I will not ask what's happening currently in the US and how the guys in the Silicon Valley are feeling about the visas restriction coming from India. The next one, which is just next to this one, is also quite interesting, and the red, again, in Switzerland, sorry if it is small, but it shows that the net population increase, if you wouldn't have people joining the country, would be the ball, which is the red, so meaning it would be stable, and hopefully we have migrants or people doing immigration, and that's driving the population a little bit up. And on the right side, you see basically that we are in demand of jobs, quite so. We have reached the highest level of job vacancy ever in 19, 1.6% of jobs are vacant. This is, again, almost in every country. We see that in Switzerland, we see that in EU, we see that in the US. And by the way, it goes in combination with higher pay raise. Again, no mystery. If you don't find people, you try to kind of uplift salaries in order to get them. And we will see in a minute, this is totally useless. But this is the first reaction of companies, of course. You're really lucky in Switzerland. You don't have what we call the needs. This is a cohort of people which are aged between 20 and 30 years old. This is an acronym which means not in education, employment or training. So basically they do nothing. And you only have 7% of that of that population, which by the way, it's a few tenths of thousands of young people. But in France, it's about 3 million people in that situation, 16% of the youth. In Italy, it's about 25. In Turkey, it's about 32% of the young population doing nothing, not being prepared for the future of work. What do you do with such a population in the future? How do you build skills? How do we hire as companies? How do we integrate those guys as a society? Well, I close here because I could elaborate on this for an hour. I took here maybe a sector, just maybe to give you an image of what could happen in a sector. Well, this is automotive. I mean, we all have a car, many of you have a car, and we all hear stories about, autonomous cars, electric cars. Well, look at what's currently changing in the car business. You've got, of course, all those digital sources in buying car. Statistics are saying that a normal consumer is spending 77% of its time on the internet before going in a dealership in order to acquire a car. So most of it happens over the web, even if the final, so far, is happening physically. You've got, of course, all those things about autonomous driving. By the way, behind autonomous driving, there is autonomous trucks. Just an idea, how many truck drivers do you have in the US? Any idea? 100,000? 1 million? 2? Well, 3 million truck drivers. What happens if the truck is getting autonomous tomorrow in driving? We got 2 million, most likely, people jobless, most likely in 3 to 5 years, because the first mover will, of course, drive all the other ones. And that's going to be the highway, most likely, that's going to be impacted first. The last mile might be still manual for a few years. But figure out, how do we turn those guys into new jobs, knowing that most of them, by the way, are coming from the states which are within the US and not on the coasts, okay? They are more coming from the Iowa kind of states, the truck drivers. Electric cars, hydrogen cars, connected supply chain, predictive maintenance, mobility as a service, data security products. I mean, this is a revolution in that business. This is changing at all floors. I can tell you there is no space in automotive which is not changing. And maybe you could say the same from pharmacy, you could say the same for retail, you could say the same for many businesses. And so basically, if you are looking 20 years down the road, you see all the jobs which might be impacted by automation. This is not 10 or 15%, this is more 20, 90% of those jobs that might be changed. It doesn't mean there will be less job. I fully concur what has been said before. There will be other jobs. And the real challenge is how do we prepare people in the transition, which is kind of a big challenge. Now, if we are looking precisely about this challenge, what does it mean? It means basically that the risk of automation by education level, you see it here, people being high education, at least in the short term, they will be less impacted, only 10%. Medium education, 30 plus, low education, 40 plus, and that's going to be one of the big problems. By the way, if you look at it as a societal angle, what happens if you take middle class, you automate jobs and you push them out of the market? What happened? Don't we see somewhere in the world the rise of populism? Just a question. You have the answer. So basically, we have quite a big problem. That's why a lot of politicians are starting to get, a little bit worried about jobs. And basically, we can see here that just in EU, we have 60 million of people with insufficient basic skills, meaning they just can't turn on a PC. Well, for people like you, it looks like science fiction, you know? But 60 million of workers just can't turn on a PC. So, and then we are dreaming to get them into AI or into even just using an app, which for us is really kind of, kindergarten play. It doesn't work. Now, at the same time, there is some very, very comforting statistics. If you are asking the question, do you believe automation will hit your job? Well, people are not stupid. They read newspaper, they have neighbors. So for half of them, this is the 53%, they know automation will come one of these days. And all the good news is that they are willing to do something. The 77% is, if I have been given the chance to do something and to learn, I would take it. Which is for, of course, including university and schools, a fantastic opportunity to get into a fully new market, because it will request a lot of investments in jobs. And by the way, when we're talking about jobs, you could see on the left side that digitization in the last 10 years have created 2 million of new jobs in EU. We'll create another almost 2 million jobs in the next decade, but 90% of those will require IT skills. I do connect that with the 60 million of people which don't have the basic skills. So there is kind of a disconnect in the labor market as we speak. So, enough good news? Oh, come on, let's go. We are going into a little bit more details now. 4 forces which are driving the upskilling imperative. So basically on the left hand, you see the increase of job automation and which kind of people is going to hit in the future. And you see here in black, it's going to be, so the upper side, it's the past. The middle side, the wave 2, it's from now to 2030. And the third wave is going to be from basically 2030 and above. And you see that basically the people in black are people with low education. So as I told you, they are hit. But the medium education are the most hit in the next years. Why so? Most likely because this is where the rules, when you are looking at what you're currently doing, are somewhere you can pick the rules. This is obvious. And there is also a big value added for the company, so somewhere the investment is worth doing. So we are currently looking at the accountancy job and all the things, doing RPA. We are not looking at the very low-end jobs, but it's coming. And you see that it's coming because on the wave 3, it's going to be more the low educated people that are going to be hit, and even more on the medium side. And you can see here the rise also for the high educated people being hit by automation moving forward. What's very interesting is at the same time we have this phenomenon, we have a decreasing talent availability. Actually, you can see that curve. This is the availability of the total of the labor force, and you see that we are hitting historical low in terms of, are there people there to kind of hire? Well, less and less. At the same time, which is always a little bit bizarre, we are kind of shutting the doors for immigration. And if you look at the third graph, it's mobility. And by the way, when you look at these percentages, the answer to the question is no. Is cooperation kind of improving movement between labor market? So these questions are no, and you see actually the little bar in between was in the past, so it's even worse now. And of course it's worse because we hear more and more news about closing the doors to immigration. The only country which basically did the opposite is Japan, because basically as they are losing so many people, they just reopened for 1.5 million jobs. But guess what? Nobody is coming because they have such a legacy in integrating people that they only have a few tenths of thousands joining. So that measure is not working. And as we have another good news to add, this is the aging population. And you see here that we are getting older and older, but you have seen this in the previous slides already. So what does it mean? Well, it means that if we are asking CEOs, guys, We have a little issue here. We need to kind of still get the company to run. We still have to use all the fantastic stuff we are developing here as a community. So how do we do it? So basically, we've been proposing 5 solutions. The first one is, let's take use of freelancers. And I will talk this afternoon about this freelancers phenomenon. But basically, you see that it's the top end, it's the pinky one, it's a few percent. So basically, it is not seen yet as the solution. Another one is the 16%, or I mean, the orange bar is kind of stealing from competition. Well, this is useless, actually, because if you have a problem, your neighbor does also have the same problem. The only solution it brings is that there is pay rise, because we are fighting for the same resource. Another one is stealing from outside my industry. Well, might work, means you have to reskill people, but again, as a total talent pool is not increasing, it doesn't help that much. Well, the last one is the bottom bar that you see, which is the largest one, is why do we retrain and upskill people? Well, actually, we are discovering something quite interesting, is that we have people working for us. And basically, they are under an employment relationship. They have a contract with us. They know us. They know our culture. They have a network. They know our process and procedures. So why don't we spend a little bit of money to increase their knowledge and reskill them for the next job? Well, actually, when you look at investments in company, we are opening new plants. We are spending hundreds of millions, if not billions, in equipment, in technology. But how much do we invest in people which are operating those technologies? Well, almost nothing. Almost nothing compared to the former investments. And what if we would be doing? Well, if we would be doing, this is the result it gives, because this is what happens to companies which are currently upskilling their people. And you see that for most of them, what they say, it's bringing a strong corporate culture. And of course, it is driving employee engagement. Obviously, if you see your employer helping you to rise in terms of skills, you might feel more engaged. And I used to say, it is not about the 10% of people you might upskill that given year. It's about the 90% looking at the 10%. Because you know next year or the year after is going to be your turn. So you might feel much more engaged with that employer that if nothing happens or if they are just doing layoff and rehire. It brings also higher workforce productivity. It's leading to greater business growth. It's improving the talent acquisition and retention. Again, if you apply for a company, you better apply for a company which takes care of its employees and their skills. It, of course, goes for greater innovation, and it's accelerating digital transformation, which is kind of the key theme these days, and it's reducing the skills gap and mismatch. So basically, there is a lot of advantages. There are a lot of advantages in going into an upskilling journey, and there is no surprise if you hear more and more announcements of big corporates doing so. And you might have heard Amazon, which is not known to be a philanthropist company, to announce, I think, 700 million to upskill 100,000 people in the next 3 years. You might have heard JP Morgan, same, also announcing a budget of 450 million. Even my company, we just announced a budget of 3 billion over the next 4 years to upskill everybody. And there is no mystery. If we don't do it, we won't last. There is a big initiative going on SAP to reskill everybody. And the quote of the new CEO, the lady who just came into the board, I think a couple of months ago, was bluntly to say, if I don't do it, my employees won't be able to use our own equipment in 3 years' time. So there is no mystery. We just have to do it. And there was a quote also in Davos last week saying the question is not to upskill or not to upskill, is how to do it. There was also a pledge which has been signed in Davos last week by 7-8 countries and 7-8 big corporates taking the commitment to upskill 1 billion people. There was an agreement signed a couple of months ago in the US by 200 corporates to upskill another tens of million people in the US. So this upskill phenomenon is there. And basically what we are producing here as a community in machine learning, AI, etc., is just basically pushing that phenomenon. The more we are pushing technology in company, the more we're going to need to upskill people, because basically they're going to be using this technology. Okay? So, and that's, I think, to your point, at one time it's going to, oh, goodness, you know, it's there now. We just had a few of them using it, and now, boom, it accelerates. Exactly your point. So, and now we are at the turning point. precisely now, and you see all those announcements coming at the same time, and there is no mystery. Singapore, as we speak, is putting together national platforms to upskill the whole population. Can you imagine? This is the most advanced place on skills, most likely, according to me, in the world, having done a lot of efforts. Those guys, they are just investing hundreds of millions in that stuff. And not only in private sector, in the public sector, they have 140,000 civil servants. They are forecasting to move 40,000 people in the next 3 years. Well, maybe that might inspire some politicians. So basically, I should summarize in one slide. Half of the workers believe automation will be in their garden in the coming months or year. 60% think that their employment long-term, that's over. We need to move ahead, and almost 80% would take the opportunity if they would be given the opportunity to upskill. 80% of the CEOs of companies surveyed worldwide think the major threat to their business is the absence of skilled people, okay? And they are thinking, for almost half of them, is their first priority to make a remedy to that is upskilling or reskilling. The average cost, because we haven't talked about that, which is a figure which has been produced by OECD, it's about $20,000 per capita to do it. Kind of between 5 to 10% of employees will be going through upskilling on any given year. So it's an exercise that will be rolling if we want to get there. And that request, if you look at the technology investment, which is about 3 trillion per year, well, we are not even close to be at the, the investment we do in skills is extremely small regarding this one. I'd like to conclude maybe with a little movie. I hope it's going to launch. I mean, our host technique can help me here. Hello? Is someone upstairs? Okay, thank you.
We are creating a divide in our society between those who are part of the new economy and those who are not able to join in.
What we learned from past episodes of technological change is a lot of jobs being replaced by technology, but the long-term benefits for the next generations can be immense.
It's really important that people are open to want to learn, they're open to being upskilled themselves, because the reality is what we don't want is to leave a whole swathe of society behind.
It's not a training expense anymore. It's an investment for the future.
Upskilling is a global issue because technology is pervasive. It just turns out it's slightly different from place to place.
Everybody is affected by this transformation. Therefore, we have to work out a strategy.
If we embrace upskilling, if we take ownership for ourselves, I do think we can write the narrative for what the future looks like.
So this is not only about business, this is a clear societal issue, and I think it's time to tackle it. Thank you very much.